the ideals, supposedly, of what Elohim City stood for and all of that, but he was still willing to talk to me, and we actually formed a friendship after I talked to him about that until he died. But he was really down on Carol Howe.
So the claims that she would make...
Apparently she hit on him back in the day.
Wow. That made, I mean, so how systemic was it as far as people in Elohim City then knowing that she was an informant? Did you get a sense of that?
Well, Andy talked to Robert Millar. He probably talked to the higher-ups, and I suspect he probably didn't do more than just said, just keep an eye on her. But that I don't know. I can't say, because Andy was my only real contact with Elohim City. It was after this time that, after Andy got kicked out, that my relationship soured with Grandpa Millar and all of that. And, I didn't really have anybody to talk to there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Wendy, isn't this right, that even Bob Millar himself was later revealed to be an informant, too?
Of sorts, yeah. He said on the record, and then there are 302s and other memos where he has said he provided information to the FBI.
And by the way, they try to talk about Elohim City as some kind of white supremacist compound. I've seen the Rainbow Coalition there. I have seen every member of every race, creed, color, and religion in the sanctuary at Elohim City. I've never seen any discourtesy to anybody, any person of color. And, they were kind of, well, see, they really aren't Christian identity either. They're kind of Millarites. It's Millar's take on all of that. He's the prophet. So calling them Christian identity is kind of like calling evangelicals Christians. What stripe? Well, what's their theology? And it's kind of, it's not like anybody else's Christian identity. And, it's basically what Robert Millar says. And, they have a communal arrangement. Some people could claim that it's kind of cult-like. Well, yeah, they're former Mennonites, so we know what that means. And unfortunately for Andy, a lot of the girls that he would otherwise could have fallen in love with and married were born in Canada, so they didn't help his immigration status at all.
Carol Howe reported about a lot of maybe what you might call explosive talk prior to the Oklahoma City bombing. And one of the things I've been doing lately, thousands of newer documents I've gotten, this seems to be after Waco. I could probably put together packets in every state of the exact same type of talk. And I don't know what the truth of it, but it does. I think that people, without really looking at that, I think they might be surprised at how common this talk was. And I'm not condoning that talk.
Well, and it was becoming more common. We noticed that after Waco, people were really angry. I talked to a lot of groups in California after that happened. We took the Waco show on the road, and we went from town to town, up and down Southern and Northern California. We talked to 300-400 people at a time, bank presidents, professional people, doctors, lawyers, some law enforcement, and they were angry. And what snuffed that anger was Oklahoma City. That kind of talk almost disappeared out of mainstream America when that bomb went off in Oklahoma City. Always found that weird.
On the subjects of weirdness here involved in the incident, could you go over the Lady Godiva incident with Strassmeir?
Lady Godiva.
Godiva, okay.
Well, Lady Godiva was something that prior to the Oklahoma City bombing, there's some film footage emerged from the dressing room of a striptease club called Lady Godiva in Tulsa, I think. And one of the girls back there is saying, hey, I just came from this table, and this guy there said, you know, on April 19th, you'll never forget me. Something to that effect. And obviously, and there are people that say that there was a Ryder truck in the parking lot, I have heard. And we don't know who else, we haven't been able to confirm who else was there, but that conversation did take place. And it seems to suggest that Tim McVeigh was at Lady Godiva at a table, possibly with some other men, and that there might have been the Ryder truck out in the parking lot. And but you know, apparently this gal, shortly after the Oklahoma City bombing, died of a drug overdose. So we don't have her to confirm what was or was not said. There have been people that have suggested that Dennis Mahon was there. There was people that have suggested that Andy Strassmeir was there. And one of the things that Wendy and I have been trying to figure out is, can any of that be confirmed? Because is there anything that's not hearsay or something that J.D. Cash came up with?
So that's an issue that I've been banging my head against the wall and just painstakingly, and with the help of George too, just trying to put together that Godiva's incident, because to be very quick about it, there's the initial reports that are 302s, and then it changes. It's like there was a guy named McVeigh with a Ryder truck outside with one friend, and then as over a year and a half later, they send people in to question some of the dancers and the owners there, which you might want to look into the history of that place because there's some weird stuff anyways. But that it changes from, you know, now it's McVeigh and one guy to it's two guys to it's a whole table of guys to it's two Ryder trucks. And I want to get to the truth of that matter, but even some of the dancers say, well, I don't really know because I think I was drugged that night, or I was so, you know, inebriated. It's just one of those things that's going to take a lot longer than tonight to get to the bottom of. But one of the claims also is coming from Cash, but then Cash himself has to later walk this back to an extent and say, well, some of this is coming from Mahon, and I got him so drunk constantly. And Cash would record most of his conversations with people, and yet those conversations, he's never able to provide those. He actually even says he didn't record those conversations. So, you know, putting that aside, I'm not taking what Cash says on face value. And it really would become a matter of probably talking to the people involved. But now it's 30 years later. It's that one's a rabbit hole. But what I can see is that the number of people grew, the number of Ryder trucks grew, and I think that the videotape that has been released definitely shows the woman coming into the dressing room saying, this man out there said I would remember him on April 19th. But what she doesn't say is that man and his 5 friends, you know, that comes later. That's introduced in somewhere else. So it's just one of those things. And I do want to really also clarify about the cause call. When I wrote Aberration, I was going on the information in front of me. And first of all, the cause call that McVeigh supposedly makes on April 17th or 18th, depending, never shows up in the Bridges records, in the Darrell Bridges records. However, those records are useless to begin with because up until almost the day of the trial, Jones is saying, why don't we have accurate records? Those records stop on April 17th. I believe McVeigh wrote you a letter saying it wasn't him. You know, but I just want to...
Yes, he said it wasn't him. Rayner said it was, and the FBI told David Holloway that he didn't call.
The cause call, I bring it up in connection with Godiva's for the fact that it's one of these little issues where it has to be, more work has to be done on it. It's not enough to say J.D. Cash said it. That's my opinion. Wendy painting, more work has to be done on it.
I agree. And I think that it's discoverable. If these records are out there somewhere, that we can figure it out who made the call. And it might just be some octogenarian in New Jersey that, got our newsletter. Possible.
Well, that's actually one thing that I think would be great to get into now. Could you sort of walk us through the story of that call, from the moment you get it to, when did you realize that this might be something worth talking to the FBI about, or did the FBI talk to you about it first? How did that whole thing?
The call came into the office as I was leaving, and I was heading to North Alabama for the Battle of Selma. We were going to do a 60-mile march through the Talladega National Forest and end up at Selma for the battle reenactment. So it was a campaign event. And I was literally heading out the door to go to the car when the phone rang. Holloway picked the phone up, and apparently it was a supporter, and he started talking to him. And so that's all I heard of the call. I didn't hear the details. Holloway has basically said, that the guy was ranting and raving, and he basically said, you're dangerously on the edge of your First Amendment rights here. And, the guy said, well, these lawsuits are going nowhere, and we need to send them a message, or something like that. And so Holloway talked to him, and then he supposedly went to catch a plane for the second anniversary of Waco. And one thing that Andrew Gumbel figured out is that apparently Dave didn't go to the second anniversary of Mount Carmel, and can't find anybody that saw him there or drove with him or anything. From what he said that he flew to Houston and drove up with the lawyers, and none of them remember seeing him. So where did Dave go? I don't know. I paid him for all of his expenses to go there, and whatever of his compensation for the time he spent there, but apparently I did not get my money's worth on that, according to Gumbel.
Has Holloway, and let's clarify, there's two Holloways. There's Bob and there's Dave. So we're talking about Dave.
Robert K. Bob Holloway and David Michael Alexander Holloway. And Dave was my assistant for several years. And I don't think he's CIA.
Did you see someone that... You do not think so?
No, I do not. I don't know what he's doing now. He works for NASA now. And and there are questions, but they say that basically he literally flew Andy back to Germany, which is not really true. They took a commercial airline and then took a train from Paris to Germany. But he walked him over the border. But there's stories that everybody about Holloway that everybody takes at face value, just because Dave said that he worked for the CIA and flying, what's the airline about the CIA and the drug running?
Oh, Air America.
Air America, he was supposedly flew for Air America. Just because he says he did doesn't mean he did. But everybody takes whatever Dave said. There's a 302 about a guy that he freaked out at a gun show or some type of show, technology show, about his story. And he's sitting there basically bragging to this guy, and everybody thinks that that's all the fountain of truth. And it's just Dave's storytelling. So, no, I don't think he worked for the CIA before he came to work for us. Now,
is that related to the...
my big question, though, is I do have a question. How does Dave do all the stuff he did with me and the records that were generated by that through the DOJ, and he still get a top-secret security clearance? That question, maybe somebody ought to ask that question.
Also, if
I would be the first to say, I don't think that Andy Strassmeir has told everything he knows. I don't think he's told us everything. He hadn't had to. But I'm still willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I do think that he was not undercover because he sounded the siren on Jim Ellison. And if he was working undercover, he'd have wanted that to prosper, get worse. And he sounded the alarm and it got him kicked out. And he never had any money. Never had any money. And I know that those guys that work for the feds get lots and lots and lots of your tax dollars. And when people call me a CIA Mossad agent, I say, show me the check. CIA Mossad agents get lots and lots of money, and I ain't got none. So show me the money, and I might own up to it.
Kirk, what do you make of the questions surrounding Strassmeir's visa and passports?
That needs more research. Gumbel looked at it, and he said that it looked like he had some oomph at the government. And of course, it's possible that somebody in government was, giving him a break because he's Gunter Karl Strassmeir's son. But more needs to be done on that. Gumbel got somebody to look at it, and it said, I think one of the things that they gave him 3 visas to enter the country or to enter and leave at the time that he got his initial passport stamp to come to the United States. And that seemed pretty odd to me, if that's true. But I don't know how to read all that bureaucraties in the passport to know what that means. And, my technical German is a little rusty. So I think if I were going to do more research, that's one of the places I would focus on. If we want to understand the Strassmeir question more, we would need to see if Gumbel's interpretation of that data is correct.
So when you say that, you think that there might still be things that, Andy knows and hasn't told, that his immigration situation could be one of those?
He never had to talk, so he's never been put under oath, right, although his affidavit was under oath. So, does he have more to tell? I imagine he does. I think it's reasonable to infer that he does. I don't know what that would be. But I'm going to pursue, his story here in the States, and I will give him the benefit of the doubt until I have reason to go against that based on verifiable documentation and facts. And, like I said, I'm a historian. I want to know what really happened. I really want the story out there to the American people before any of us get 10 to 20 years older, which will make me 88 years old in 20 years. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things I guess I wanted to sort of get back to before we move on too far, the whole thing with the cause call, that, it's this guy who is ranting and raving to Holloway about the Waco lawsuit, saying that it's, basically he's doomed, and after the bombing,
getting nowhere, not gonna get anywhere, fixes in, that kind of thing. And see, we're used to calls like that. We get calls like that from time to time. And Dave just happened to be the one that got to deal with it because I was leaving town.
Right. Was it? So, I guess I would be curious, because obviously there's something that I think, Dave Holloway ended up talking to the FBI about a few days after the bombing. Do you know how that came about?
Once we got back from Dave, from wherever he went, which wasn't the second anniversary of Mount Carmel, and when I got back from the reenactment, we realized, that call, and Dave had already explained to me the call, and that's when he contacted the FBI to let him know about it. And I called the FBI because I had seen a guy at the first anniversary of Mount Carmel that was a dead ringer for the picture of John Doe number 2. And so I called the FBI to give that information. So they got a call from me, and they got a call from Holloway.
Now, I know
it turns out the guys, the Hispanic guy that I had met at the first Mount Carmel is a guy named Villarreal, I believe, and wasn't involved. But boy, he looked like a dead ringer to John Doe number 2 when I remembered him after seeing the John Doe number 2 picture.
And you said that ultimately the FBI later did, you later would hear from the FBI telling you, that it wasn't. Yes,
later on, and this would have been after probably Reyna had come and wreaked havoc in our offices. The FBI told Dave that McVeigh had not called, and of course, Reyna called to say that he had. Or Reyna was there in our office. And he questioned Dave at some length, and Dave was on a lot of pain medication for a back injury at the time, and I'm not sure what he got out of him, but it was not a good time to talk to Dave in Dave's book because he was in so much pain.
So by this point, they have not yet discovered that so they had these, what they called bootleg phone records that Cash and Reyna were going around showing people, which did not come from discovery. They had gotten them through other means, which is a whole other story. But that would have been what might be being presented. Look, I have this phone call right here. This is within weeks of them learning that other sets of phone records had been manipulated, these bootleg phone records. As far as I understand it, the defense never did get, McVeigh's defense never did get shown a set of records. And Jones himself drops the issue of the cause call by the time he writes the writ of mandamus. Maybe that's March 97. And in subsequent filings. So I just think that's worth noting as far as the cause call is concerned.
And just so I don't forget it, I just wanted to set the record straight on getting Andy out of the country. We had getting calls from the press about Andy and Andy the German, and there was a lot of media interest, and we were afraid, and this is like December of 95, we were afraid that Andy might become like material witnesses in Waco. They'd have fewer rights than a criminal defendant. And if the press is hot on his heels, how long could it be before the DOJ catches up, and decides, well, we don't know if he did anything, but we're going to stick him in a hole somewhere until the trial's over so he doesn't run away. So we figured, well, let's get him back to Germany now. So I called my biggest supporter and asked him for money, and he gave us $5,000. And I don't know if Dave and Andy drove to Texas. They might have flown. But they met up with Richard Sharrow, and that's where the famous color picture of Andy in front of the U.S. flag was taken. And then Dave took Andy over the border, I believe at El Paso, and then they took, I imagine, a bus, Guadalajara. They caught a flight from Guadalajara to Paris, and in Paris they took a train to Germany, and that's how Dave got Andy back to Germany. And then he got a vicious cold, and when he got to Germany, I contacted the FBI, and we had done an affidavit for Andy and made him available for questioning. And the FBI didn't take very long. It was like 30 minutes. And that's kind of the, so anyway, that's how Andy got back to the, back to Germany. And I believe at that time, the GSG-9 thought he might need some protection because somebody, I think J.D. Cash, had pushed some buttons on Dennis Mahon and said that Andy was a plant. and Mahon shot his mouth off, which is what he was famous for doing. And it sounded like a threat that they wanted to rub Andy out. So GSG-9 got involved to see if he needed any protection. And I didn't think I wasn't too worried about a Mahon threat.
It was actually Stephen Jones who calls the FBI and tells them there's been a hit put out on Strassmeir.
Oh, really? Okay.
He doesn't, I know it's a recent discovery that I just made, like probably within the last few weeks. When you line everything up, it's those conversations with Mahon are supposedly taking place, and it's Jones who I suppose legally had to report that, but he doesn't give Cash's name, but that's obviously where the information came from. But
right.
Just throwing that out there.
For my money, that's the Twin City bombing in 1993. That's the connection everybody I think needs to be worried about and thinking about, and its connections to Oklahoma City. If you remember, in 93, there was an Islamic bombing in the parking garage of the Twin City Towers. This is before, 911, and it blew up. The Ryder truck or the rental truck blew up, and it was an ammonium nitrate bomb, and it did a lot of damage to the parking garage, but it didn't take the buildings down. And there was apparently an Islamic connection. One of the guys that was
you mean the
indicted
Twin Towers in New York City, not the Twin Cities, the Twin Towers in New York City.
Oh, right, Twin Towers. Yes, thank you. In New York City, thank you.
I just want to clarify, because if there's another bombing,
right.
I want to know.
Anyway, there seemed to be an Islamic connection and a Philippines connection. And, of course, fast forward 2 years, another ammonium nitrate bomb goes off in front of a federal building this time. And, if you read through the Rohrabacher report, which is a congressman, who I think had his finger on the pulse of what was really happening, and I wish that it had been expanded. It might need to be reopened. That Terry Nichols was not in the Philippines for the sex trade, as has been alleged. He was there to meet this Islamic guy that had been involved in the bombing in New York City. And the conventional thinking is, I can just cut to the chase here, what the conspiracy thinking is that this is a PATCON operation, and I know several people that are tangentially involved in all this that believe that the Oklahoma City bombing was a PATCON operation gone horribly wrong. And their thinking is that the bomb was supposed to go off like in New York City in the parking garage, but the truck didn't fit. So McVeigh drives it around to the front and sets it off there. And the people that were there to sting before it detonated were stymied because he didn't use the garage because the truck wouldn't fit. He went around front and blew it there. And that may explain the unexplainable black woman's leg that was found in the rubble. No body with it, but she was in camouflage trouser leg with a combat boot on. And nobody has ever claimed that leg, to my knowledge. So was she part of the team there to sting the bombers before they could push the plunger? And that is a very explainable, that's a very understandable conspiracy. We blew it big time. We got to hide, we got to cover this up. We only got to have one bomber.
So Kirk, what is your take? What is your take then on John Doe number 2?
Well, that there was one, and I think that he's Islamic, just like the picture. The guy looks like a beefy Mediterranean, or Islamic, or Hispanic, but I think Islamic would fit. And of course, that was an initial area of inquiry in the beginning of the Oklahoma City bombing. You heard about it, but then once they decided to shut down John Doe number 2, all of that ended. I think that the U.S. government figured they had bitten off more than they could chew. They figured out that if the families of the dead are satisfied with what we do in the Oklahoma City bombing trial, the rest of the country will be satisfied as well, and it'll all go away. And I think that was their thinking. I really do think that cynically was what they were thinking. If the victims and their families, victims' families say it's okay, we did a good job, then the rest of the country will buy it too. And we essentially did, and now we've got people that don't even know that it happened.
Well, Kirk, let's double back to the FBI's PATCON operation. Did you have any other thoughts on that and how it related to these events? And I know I had a few questions about that as well. I think also Wendy and George did.
Well, I've had experience with FBI teams going out and getting stupid right-wingers, jacked up and then get them to commit a crime so they can sting them. I mean, that's been a pattern of federal law enforcement prosecution of right-wingers since I've been around, since I've been practicing law. I mean, it seems to be, and there is the thing about right-wingers, it's open season. If you call somebody a white supremacist, it's open season on them. And until the Randy Weaver incident, you could just about do anything, squish them, kill them, stomp on their rights, put them away in prison for 300, 400 years, and you get away with it and get medals for it and get promotions. And that all kind of came to a stop with Randy Weaver and then Waco. But with the temper of the country, getting pretty hot and steamed over what happened at Waco, and like I said, is it a coincidence that mainstream dissent on government abuse of dissidents and right-wingers and that kind of thing stopped with the Oklahoma City bombing? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. FDR said there's no coincidences in politics. And I happen to be a believer in that. And I happen to be one of those guys that thinks that the deep state's in control of this country. And I think it's been in control since November 22nd, 1963, when the deep state got away with murdering a president. And if you think I'm nuts, read Roger Stone's book, The Man Who Killed JFK. He makes a compelling case. He's writing as an insider, not as a conspiracy nut. I highly recommend it. I think he makes the case. The presumption is on the other foot now. Show us that this lone gunman stuff is right. So anyway, it is all connected. And, I'll take my tinfoil hat off now. So.
Well, you're probably in the right place for tinfoil hat wearers.
That's good.
Wendy or George, did either of you have some questions about PATCON here?
Yeah,
well,
I guess.
It's related. I mean, I was hoping maybe you could walk us through your involvement with the Davidians and with Waco, just for the record, because it's
we were running our little legal organization, Cause Foundation, and which is not where white legal traditions prevail, but where Western legal traditions prevailed. Cause stood for Canada, United States, South Africa, and Europe. And we felt like Western civilization, the concept of liberty and rights, was a gift of the West to the rest of the world, and that's where those rights were most endangered, is the places where they were born. And we never claimed to be a white anything. That's something that our unofficial publicist, Morris Dees, wanted to make sure everybody heard the word white in any time Cause Foundation was mentioned. But and it turns out in Waco, we ended up representing the Rainbow Coalition when nobody else would. We started getting calls after the shootout at Mount Carmel, where the ATF, always total failure was what everybody was saying ATF stood for back then. When they did Operation Showtime to get their congressional $20 million for their new SWAT team, by showing them seizing this terrorist cult, polygamous cult that didn't quite work out for them. We got there on day 6 and set up a command post in Gary Coker's office, and Gary Coker was the attorney that represented David Koresh. And we were there for most of the 51-day siege. And we decided to, because I had been tangentially involved in the Weaver standoff, I knew what it was going to take to bring David Koresh out of there, and that is get him a smoke-breathing, rhino-killing attorney that can help him. And for my money, that was Dick DeGuerin. And I knew Dick DeGuerin and had his private numbers. And, you know, I called DeGuerin and I said, Dick, we're putting together a group of lawyers to help give the Davidians an incentive to surrender, because they'll have, you know, life after surrender, because they'll have attorneys fighting for them in court, not these appointed guys that'll do a lousy job or just go through the motions. And DeGuerin said, I'll represent anybody in there as long as it's David Koresh. And he says, but you tell his mother, you know, you tell his mother she needs to call me. You have his mother call me, and I'll represent her son. And it took us all day to get Bonnie convinced to call Dick DeGuerin, but she finally did, and he came down to Mount Carmel the next day with her in the passenger seat to try to get in to talk to his client. And we started setting up attorneys. We called the Lawyers Response Committee. We filed a temporary restraining order to have the judge force the FBI to pull back, and the judge sat on it for 2 weeks and then dismissed it. But we started calling attorneys and getting them to work with a Davidian family to help get their loved ones out. I got a call from the British Consul General in Houston, a lady named Tonks, and asked me if she could have British families call me, because apparently there were a lot of Anglo-Jamaicans in there. Everybody was calling them, you know, white terrorists and all of this, but actually it was the Rainbow Coalition in there. And I told Mrs. Tonks we'd be happy to represent families, and so we started working on getting attorneys to work with the British families of the families who were British passports but Jamaican ancestry. And we did that until the fire. And then we went on hyperdrive to file civil suits to expose what we considered their gross negligence and recklessness in you know, the fire, which killed a lot of people, and it was completely unnecessary, because I will still believe till the day I die what Dick DeGuerin told me. He said, those people are going to walk out of there. Why? Because I can beat this in court. Guerin told me that in no uncertain terms, that he would beat this in court. And when Dick DeGuerin tells you that about a criminal trial he's going to handle, you can just about take that to the bank. So we were there. We were actively involved in the siege, criminal process, the civil trials from 1993 to the year 2000.
And the when everything broke with Oklahoma City bombing, and then Strassmeir's name becomes connected to this in news reports, how did that, and I'm sorry if you just addressed it, how did that impact that case?
Well, we had,
if at all,
two things killed. The lawsuits were in 2001, but Cause Foundation was publicly supported, and we needed public support to keep going. We didn't have grants. You know, we couldn't go to these billionaire grant places and get money. We had to rely on our newsletter. And about this time, all of these conspiracy guys are dumping on us about spiriting Andy back to Germany, and you know, somehow we're the Spotlight, which was a right-wing publication that came out of Washington, D.C. There was a drunk reporter there by the name of Michael Collins Piper that was trashing me right, left, and center. about Strassmeir and about the Freemen standoff, that we had sold out the Freemen and that we had sold out America, and we helped get a CIA Mossad agent, back to Germany, and that I was Andy Strassmeir's CIA Mossad handler. I would just respond that says, CIA Mossad handlers get lots of money. Where's mine? Where is mine? But it didn't stop it, and it pretty much bankrupted Cause Foundation. We went out of business. That's when I started working on Southern Heritage cases, and been doing that ever since. Our big case right now is trying to sue the regime for taking down the Confederate Reconciliation Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which they did just before Christmas, which, by the way, was sculpted by the first American Jewish sculptor of international reputation, Sir Moses Ezekiel, who was the first Jewish cadet at VMI and fought at the Battle of Newmarket as a Confederate veteran. And, the Army has made it clear that they hate people who fought for the Confederacy, and therefore I guess they hate people that have Confederate ancestry. And, they took it down just before Christmas. That was their Christmas, the Joe Biden Christmas present to the nation.
So that, so it really, I guess you mentioned that this really, put a dent in what you were doing with Cause. So the Waco lawsuits.
It did. It put us out of business. We had to go do something else. Now, we weren't able to participate. Fortunately, Mike Cadell was the head of our attorney team and the clients that we represented, and he put $900,000 of his own personal money in the Waco civil trials that he handled. He spent $900,000 of his own money to do that trial. So we were able to coast in on his coattails and stay involved, even though we weren't getting any money. Mm-hmm. But we did the trial. We did the civil trial in Waco in 2001.
Could you sort of, I guess, outline, the basic argument? Because, there are so many different things that people will say about Waco and, more extreme versions. And,
we were suing them for wrongful death, that basically they created a situation in a criminal and reckless manner with complete disregard for their safety that caused their deaths. Mm-hmm. So criminal or gross recklessness. We didn't. Now, Gordon Novell and the happy camp of Ramsey Clark wanted to accuse him of absolute first-degree premeditated murder. And I think we toned it down. Because you can only go, we're in a venue that Walter Smith is the judge. We've already know that we got a hatchet job coming on our cases, so we didn't want to make it worse by being completely extravagant in what we were saying happened. No flamethrower tanks or anything like that. So we went with gross recklessness and gross negligence.
Sure.
And we sued several agents in their personal capacity, but mostly these were tort claim acts. And in the tort claim act, you don't get a jury, under the theory that if you had a jury, the government would never win a case. Now, they can panel an advisory jury, but the judge is not bound to take their advice. But by the time these cases went to trial, it was 8 years after, the standoff had ended and the country had gone on. A lot of people had forgotten about it, and the government was able to just come in with the party line, that they burned themselves, immolated themselves, and that there was a suicide pact, and they're a bunch of crazos, and they had a bunch of underage kids there anyway that Koresh was sleeping with, and, the jury was completely unsympathetic and poured us all out.
At least, pursuing, getting documentation and collecting, alternative what happened. And I guess I sort of wanted to ask, going off that, that obviously in a legal venue, as you say, it makes sense to limit yourself to what you can actually prove directly. But from a, historical perspective, what do you think about the events of what, for the example, the events of April 19th, whether they the Davidians set the fires or the government was the one responsible for that?
I really do believe that when Dick DeGuerin told me that he was going to walk Koresh out of there a free man, he could beat it in court. When it looked like it really was going to happen, that they were going to surrender, I think that signed their death warrants. I really do. Nobody in government is going to let that happen. And, I think that it was a criminal plan. They had a drunk make the decision, and that's Janet Reno. And they went up there and told, they're slapping the babies, they're slapping the babies. And they got that old drunk. And she really wasn't head of the Attorney General's office. Webb Hubbell was the man behind the throne. He's the one that represented the Clintons. Janet Reno just met a demographic, thing for getting in as Attorney General. But they manipulated her. The Jeff Jamar was a weakling who was being bullied by the hostage rescue team commander. Look, they're making monkeys out of you. They're making monkeys out of the FBI. We need to go in there, rat-a-tat-tat. He finally caved. They sent a team to Washington to argue their case, and that's where they said slapping the babies, and they got authorization. And they came back and issued their marching orders to Jeff Jamar. And in they went, and a lot of people died. The Davidians were trying to survive. That's why they were in cooler. It turned out to be a bake oven that baked them alive. But I think they were there to try to survive the fire.
So do you believe
people getting shot was because they were literally baking to death and they needed relief from suffering? So they were taken out quick once they figured out that they had actually put themselves into a death trap.
Right. And that's, one of the things, there are several different things that, I've heard about. First of all, that the assault on the basically military assault on April 19th might well have, knocked over the lanterns that they were using, and that was the cause of the fire. Also, of course, that the FBI was using.
And they were kerosene lamps on top of hay bales in hallways. Oh, and by the way, and I do believe, and I think it has been proven, that they were firing at the building from helicopters. They have denied for years, but I think that happened. And I never got a chance to prove it because they were smart and didn't indict my guy, so that I wouldn't be allowed to be a part of the criminal defense team. I represented Oliver Gyarfas, who was from Australia. And he saw Winston Blake die. Winston Blake was on the bottom bunk, and the bullets came in about 8 to 9 feet up from the floor down at an angle and shot him through the head. So somebody up there outside the building and above the water tanks was shooting at him with fully automatic machine gun fire, probably from M16s. And Catherine Madison, who was a survivor, she said she saw helicopters firing. Of course, nobody on their side believed it or were willing to consider it.
You represented David Thibodeau, was it?
I didn't represent. I got him an attorney.
Okay.
And but I didn't represent him, and he went with Ramsey Clark for the civil cases. And that's because Gordon Novell came down there, slick man that he was, and got all the Davidians basically to sign up with Ramsey Clark.
Yeah, what's going on with Novell?
I think Novell was a CIA plant. He was involved with the JFK assassination, apparently, either with a cover-up or some part of it. But he was working as an agent for the CIA, apparently, in New Orleans. And I think that he was there to muddy the waters in Waco. I really do. Because of the extreme nonsense. He talked like an informant does, saying what I call the illegal BS. And that's the way he talked all the time. And he was a braggart and kind of a jerk. Not a very nice guy, in my opinion. And I said, why does anybody tolerate him? And but he sold the Davidians a bill of goods that he was going to prove the flamethrower tank, and he even had a drawing that he used to show people of a flamethrower tank. And it's just crazy stuff. Everybody that we knew that was sane was wondering, why is he here? Well, we couldn't get rid of him. And he was Ramsey Clark. He's the one that got Ramsey Clark on the case. And Ramsey Clark,
I know he
was
would later
amiable, just about anything Gordon Novell wanted to present.
So what do you make of, I guess, because if you look at, the agencies involved with Waco, I mean, you got the ATF starting the whole mess, and then you have the FBI's hostage team basically botching it the whole way through, and ultimately, assaulting people who, from what you said, sounds like they were very much going to surrender if they had just waited longer. What do you make of a CIA person getting involved in that? Was there any indication before that the CIA had any interest in that whole thing?
Well, I haven't looked at Waco in that light, but it would not surprise me. Lon Horiuchi, the sniper that killed Vicki Weaver, FBI sniper, was at Waco. He commanded one of the sniper teams there under the hostage rescue team. And I have been told that he had worked for the CIA, but I don't know if that's true or not. I don't even remember where I read it. But I certainly assume that there probably could have been a CIA component in all of that. And,
yeah.
The FBI did learn some of the lessons of Waco, and that was shown in the Montana Freemen standoff, where they actually brought me in as the last third-party intermediator to bring those people out, or else the HRT was going in. But the rule by that time was, you don't mess your HRT, you don't even talk in our councils while we're negotiating. It's a negotiator's deal, and until they say that the negotiation has failed, you butt out, you're not even involved. And that's the way the Montana Freemen standoff was handled. All negotiators working with intermediaries, and we were the last party that was allowed in, and if we had failed, then they would have sent the HRT in.
What involvement, if any, did you have with the Ruby Ridge situation?
Well, if you read accounts by my unofficial publicist, Morris Dees, you'll know that I was married at the Aryan Nations Church and in September of 1990. And believe it or not, Randy Weaver was there at my wedding. I think I've got a video of him somewhere in the reception line to shake hands. And it was shortly after I got back to Houston that we heard that Randy Weaver had gotten set up on the gun charge, and I was talking to his attorney, who was also Richard Butler's attorney, and he was an old guy. I'm just trying to remember what his name was. Irishman, nice guy, good attorney. And he said, well, Randy's safe where he is, and we're not too worried about him, and that we eventually think we can probably bring him down and surrender him. And, that was kind of the last thing that I heard about it after we made inquiries. And then we moved to North Carolina, and it was shortly after that the shootout between Weaver's son and all of that took place. And we, of course, remember Bo Greitz is the one that basically got him to surrender based on Jerry Spence handling his criminal case. We were on our way to the airport the day he surrendered with a civil suit, very similar to the one that we later filed in Waco. And we were going to go ahead and sue the U.S. Marshal's office before they could indict Weaver on criminal charges. And he had surrendered. We found out that he surrendered. We heard it on the radio as we were driving to the airport to fly to Spokane, Washington, and to the drive to northern Idaho. So we didn't get a chance to use that, but we did talk to Weaver and the Weaver children, and he agreed to let us file a lawsuit on behalf, for the death of his wife and his son. And so for about 2 weeks, we represented Randy Weaver and his family. And we're working very hard to get the lawsuits done so it can be filed as soon as possible. Well, Jerry Spence heard about that, and he basically went to the jail and told Randy, you can have Kirk Lyons as your civil attorney, and you can have me as your criminal attorney, but you can't have both. And Jerry Spence was already ready to parcel out the civil case to his friends for the money it would make them and probably a kickback to him. And he took the civil case, and in my opinion, he bollocksed it. And he did not sue Lon Horiuchi, the sniper, in his individual capacity. I think he walked away from a $200 million case and got like $1 million for Randy Weaver. So anyway, that was my involvement with the Weaver case.
Wow.
Kirk, out of curiosity, how well did you know Bo Greitz, or did you know him at all?
I knew him. After the sedition trial in 1988, I was invited to come to Pete Peters' camp up in Colorado to speak about the trial. I was paid to come. Pastor Butler paid me to come and talk about the sedition trial, and Pete Peters paid for me to come and talk about the sedition trial. And I think I met Bo Greitz there. Met him on probably 3 or 4 other occasions, including the meeting where the militia movement was supposedly founded. That I guess I would be one of the founders then, if that's true, or if you want to believe that, as is published by my unofficial publicist in the Southern Poverty Law Center. Anyway, he had a great idea calling Jerry Spence, and I just stole the idea for Waco. And it worked. I think it was working, and I think those people would have walked out of there, I think, DeGuerin, but that was just more than the FBI could stand. They weren't going to allow that to happen. That was just one black eye too many for the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that Lon Horiuchi, of course, was there at Waco as well, and I mean, some of the things that come up in that case that, there were apparently, spent shells in the undercover house that Horiuchi was using at Waco that, matched what the HRT would have been using. And I was wondering, in the civil suits, did you pursue possibility that the HRT was actually involved in, some of the gunshot deaths?
We sure looked at it. But I don't remember what the resolution of what actually ended up in pleadings. That's something we might need to see if those documents might be in the Lyons collection in Baylor, because I don't have them anymore, and I would have to find my other Waco boxes if they're there to see if there's anything like that in there. And then of course I'm going to have to look through them in real time, there's a lot there. You can put a lot of paper in a library box. It needs to be done. It does need to be done.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's sort of, this interesting continuity. We're talking about PATCON, and you can see, but from case to case, the same agency is running these bizarre operations. And Horiuchi showing up in Ruby Ridge and in Waco. I think there are some people, right, Wendy, like someone involved in PATCON who actually speculated that Waco was also an example of a PATCON operation gone wrong, basically, in a similar way that Oklahoma City was.
There's definitely a continuity. I think by this time, PATCON would have technically, I need to check, but technically had been over, but obviously on the face of it, it doesn't appear that way. If something just changes its name, but does the exact same thing.
By the way, I'll go so far as to say that I believe that all the weapons that were fired at ATF agents and that were in the Branch Davidian building at the time were legal at the time of the raid. I think that as the siege wore on, as they thought that there might be some bad climax, I think that some of the weapons inside were converted to full auto, but not before February 28th. I think that happened sometime during the siege.
Kirk, I had some questions here about PATCON too. I wanted to ask you right quick.
Sure.
One was related to two other operations that might have been running around roughly the same time. One was called Operation Backpack, and the other was called Operation Quail Shooter. And this would have been tied in with the 20th Special Forces Group. I was just curious if you had heard of either of those or had any indications of members of the 20th Special Forces Group tied in with the Texas Light Infantry.
Was that at Fort Bragg?
No, the 20th Special Forces Group would not have been stationed at Fort Bragg. They're actually stationed at, was it Fort Campbell in Kentucky? At least they would have been in that era, if I remember correctly.
Nothing comes to mind. You know, my recollection is not being refreshed. It doesn't, it's sailing over my head. I don't remember anything about that.
They're technically considered a National Guard unit, even though they're a Special Forces outfit. Supposedly, they and the 19th are the two Special Forces units that would be able to operate domestically because they have the status of National Guardsmen. Okay. Well, the other one I had was about a subject that's a bit of a hobby horse of mine called, well, I guess you would say the various incarnations of the Sovereign Order of St. John. One of these outfits was tied in with the CMA and was implicated in the PATCON investigation. I was just curious if you had ever heard of any of the sovereign...
Well, I'm familiar with the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. It's one of the oldest orders of knighthood. And I actually have a friend who was the artist Bruce Marshall, who was knighted by the former King Peter II of Yugoslavia. And he was you know, a knight grand master of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. So it is a bona fide charitable order of knighthood that's out there today. What it might have to do with the CMA, you know, I still have to figure out if they were on my radar or not. And I don't think that they were. I might have had their publications mailed to me, and I might have, you know, have them archived somewhere, but I don't remember anything about any of the personalities or anything like that, or having had any interaction with them. Well, I don't think they ever called for legal advice.
The Order of St. John that turned up with the CMA was one headed by a fellow named John Grady, who was based out of, I think it was Benton, Tennessee, actually, for quite a few years. He had a church there as well. And he was also...
I'm familiar with the church.
Okay.
And the name John Grady, I don't think I was ever there. And I might have met him, but I don't remember much more about him.
Okay, well, thank you.
I certainly didn't know he was a member of the Order of St. John. So.
Oh, he was the Grand Master, actually, for one of the variations of it.
Well, is it his own variation, or is it the bona fide Order of Knighthood?
Well, that depends on who you asked. I mean, in theory, they came from the Russian line of succession related to the Knights of Malta, and sort of the group in the Cold War was the one that Charles Pachel had out of Shikshini, Pennsylvania. That's where the early kind of phrase Shikshini Knights of Malta came from. And then from there, they sort of broke into a lot of breakaway sects. The King Peter one, which you just mentioned, was one of them. Grady was another one. There's quite a few of them now. Well, anyway.
Well, like I said, I remember the name, but I don't remember much interaction with him. Like I said, we might have received his newsletter and archived it.
Did you ever hear the other group that Grady was involved with? I think it was the American Pistol and Rifle Association or something like that. George...
Yes, and they had a shooting range, I think, in East Tennessee.
Yes, they did.
But I never went to it.
Okay.
But I remember hearing about it.
All right, well, those are my main questions. Like I said, I kind of collect a lot of information on the various orders of St. John. It's a bit of a hobby of mine.
You know, if I run across my archives on their their newsletter, I'd be happy to either give you the originals or make copies.
Oh, no, I would appreciate that very much, sir.
Yeah, not a problem.
Oh, all right. Did Wendy or George, did you guys have any other questions here?
It's not a question, just a comment. One of the pieces of literature McVeigh had on him at the time of his arrest was literature from Grady's Pistol Association. And then there's this note he writes to his defense, at a couple of years after he's in prison. And he's saying, how come nobody's looking at that? Maybe you should look at that, which is just a very curious thing for him to say. I don't know. I just want to add that in there when we talk about Grady and Grady's associations. He had literature from that organization on him, and then makes this very curious statement later that maybe that needs to be looked at. And there's no resolution to that. I just am throwing it out there. And I know that Grady was a target of PATCON, at least for a little while. I don't know what Tim McVeigh meant by that, but since you brought it up.
Well, the thing with the Grady one being targeted was sort of curious because there was their main rival in the 80s was another Order of St. John that was based out of Ohio. And that one had some heavy hitters in it. I've got the mastheads for those, and John Sinklov and a couple of other people. What was the congressman that died in the flight in 1983, Flight 007 over the Soviet Union? George, do you know what I'm talking about? He was the head of
Larry McDonald.
Yes, Larry McDonald. He was another member of them. But it's because of the rumors that the CMA was tied in with Iran-Contra. I've always wondered about the possibility of a connection to that OSJ because you had people like Singlov turning up in it, but for some reason it seemed like it was the Grady one, which they had a bit of a rivalry that was really singled out. So that's kind of another interesting thing. And then also a lot of the criticism that they loved at the American Pistol and Rifle Association. Well, George, Wendy, did you guys have anything else to ask here before we sign off?
I mean, I really don't. Thank you so much for doing this, because how long has it been since you did such a long, I guess, audio interview? I know you've talked to some people who did some short form journalism, but how long has it been since you've gone on record like this about these issues?
Well, it all, I was pretty active on, as a keyboard warrior, 95, 96, 97, 98 till about, I guess about 2000, and then it just kind of petered off, and then I probably would have started talking to Jesse in about 2006, but that was just between me and him. So just as I've gotten older, the historian in me is saying, oh, wow, I really got to put all this stuff together and, see what part of the record that I have that needs to be transmitted to the next generation. And then I need to, tell what I know and see what we can find out with other researchers of good faith that are, that are honest and want to just follow the leads where the truth takes them and find out what happened and eventually make that available to the American people. I think right now we are probably the most lied to people on the planet. And, I have very, very, very little faith left in what was a great experience, and that is, we're living in the ruins of our republic, in my opinion. And we're ruled over by a regime that stole an election 2020, in my opinion. And I don't think that's incontrovertible. I think everybody knows it. And so we're living, it's like 475 AD. And, before something worse happens, we need to get this stuff down on the record. And if there's stuff that needs to be exposed about this government of ours, then let us expose it. And if it exonerates him, well, then it exonerates him. That's fine. I just want to know the truth. I want to know what really happened.
There's so much, even just, with everything, but with Oklahoma City, things that are taken for granted that have been warped over time. One of my big is trying to sort out how any of these stories developed. So thank you for weighing in on all this.
Well, my pleasure. And Wendy, I thank you for all of your insight and research. And I've been very grateful for the things you've been willing to share with me. And George, I look forward to working with you on Waco. I've got a laundry list of stuff I owe you, and I'm just going to have to, take a weekend sometime and just find it. So stay on me, and I'll do it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I appreciate, your talks and, sharing this history that's, almost been lost. And I, want to help preserve, what actually happened during this whole siege and everything after that. I think that, people have a right to know.
Well, I think that's a good note to end things on here. We'll sign off for now. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for listening and your support. And with that, good night and good luck to you all.
Outside, the situation's serious. The earth went flat, the sun went black, and it's making me delirious. And I'm watching it all from this quarantine window, thinking, ooh, what a time to be woke. Yes, and I'm laughing just to keep from crying. It ain't funny, even if it is a joke. I'm talking about the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, I'm talking about the Twilight Zone. On a long, rugged road, a long way from home. I got these blue pills sitting on my nightstand, baby, and I feel like they was made just for you. They won't exactly get you high, but you might feel what it's like to lose. I've got some red ones too, I keep them next to the blues. And man, it will go straight to your head. It takes about 18 months to kick in good, and my brother, you'll be seeing red. It goes with the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, it goes with the Twilight Zone. Been waiting out here for years, man, what took y'all so long? Well, old Morpheus, man, he stuck out his two hands. He said, take your pick, brother, yeah, man. Whoa, well, reached out and went snatch, and I gobbled them both up, natch. And then it's, oh no, oh no. At the end of the world, it looks mighty fine, stumbling around, cold candy flippy, yeah, man, whoa. At first it made me sick, till I caught on to the trick, and now it's, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm cool, baby, what about you? Ooh, now left is right and black is white. Everything turned upside down. I made a note to myself, I was gonna sort it all out if I could just make it back to town. But for now I'm stuck in this quarantine cloister. Hit me up, boys, we'll have us a time. I'm taking the rest of my red and blue pill stash. I'm gonna chop them up into purple lines, the color for the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, it goes with the Twilight Zone. I'm gonna do one more bump, then I'll be over the hump. And now it's, yeah.